I'm Zachary Cartwright. This is Water and Food.
My question was, when is the flower dry enough to then go into the curing process? Did a little reading and, of course, found that water activity is that metric, even greater than the moisture content meters that some people would use.
Today I'm joined by Dr. Allison Justice, who is the founder of the Hemp Mine located in South Carolina. Dr. Justice has combined her scientific education from Clemson University and her experience with cannabis producers in California to supply premium hemp in her home state. The Hemp Mine is known for its transparency to its customers and sound research, and in this episode we discuss her highly regulated industry, current experiments, and use of water activity measurements. Let's hear what Dr. Justice has to say on water and food.
Hello. Thank you for having me on this show. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and the industry that you are in?
Yeah, so I am a PhD plant scientist. Did my work at Clemson University. Most of my work there, well, actually all of my work there had nothing to do with the industry that I am in now, except for it being still work with a plant. Mainly controlled agricultural studies with ornamentals and vegetable type crops. But now I am working with cannabis, something that at the time when I was studying was not legal or even, considered by my fellow peers to potentially be a career path. But oddly, it turned out as one. And now I'm the founder and owner of the Hemp Mine, which is a vertically integrated hemp company in South Carolina.
So you did nothing with hemp or cannabis when you were in graduate school?
I did not.
Mm-hmm.
I worked mainly with plants like pansies and poinsettias and garden moms, which coincidentally worked out quite well because the plants, as far as how you push them into reproduction, are very similar. So that actually worked out in the positive at this point.
And what were some of your favorite memories about grad school or about being at Clemson University?
I would say it was the freedom that my major professor, Dr. Jim Faust, gave me. He basically said, here's some parameters, but, I want you to be able to explore and come up with your own project. And so my project involved a fungus, a endophyte, which I looked at and explored how, pairing this endophyte with different species of plants, how does it do different things? So, uptake nutrients or fight off different pathogens or even help promote rooting. And so I was able to not only, really get to dig in with plants, but I also got to gain a lot of experience in mycology in, the study of fungi. And that was just really cool, getting to kind of dip my toes into both waters and not just be in one.
Mm-hmm. And once you were done with graduate school, did you start the Hemp Mine right away or did you work somewhere else or what did you do before the Hemp Mine?
So I consulted for a couple of years with greenhouses across the U.S. and again, mainly ornamentals. And eventually I just started getting calls for cannabis growers because, again, it is a plant and there's a lot of similarities between cannabis and other crops. And so began consulting and fell in love with the plant and the opportunity for research with this plant. And eventually moved out to California to be VP of cultivation for Outco Labs, who is a vertically integrated medical cannabis company. And so I stayed there for three and a half years. And that was a really great experience because at that facility, I was originally hired on to design and build a 2-acre greenhouse, which at that time was the biggest cannabis facility in California, which was really cool to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
But we also had 2 indoor grow facilities and 1 outdoor as well as being vertically integrated. So I got to really gain experience with the whole, production. So everything from seed to sale, and then really gain knowledge with extraction and formulation, et cetera, et cetera. So it really set me up to be able to do what we do today at the Hemp Mine, which is that same exact setup, except with hemp instead of a THC producing plant.
So you took all that knowledge from grad school and then all this experience from California and then decided to start the Hemp Mine. Did you start this with friends or colleagues, or how did you go about organizing this business?
Well, I'm from South Carolina, and when I was out in California, South Carolina passed a bill to allow hemp production, and there were only 20 farmers approved that first year. And my family's background is farming of all different kinds. On the land we grow our hemp today, my grandparents grew cotton there, and then my parents had everything from tree production to hay production, cattle, and greenhouses. And so they're farmers.
Mm-hmm.
So I encouraged my mom to apply for a license, and so she got a license. And then after, I guess, a year and a half after they started growing hemp, we decided, hey, this is going really well. I'm going to move back and we're going to take this to the next level. And so it's a family endeavor. My brother and sister and mom all work here. And then one of my best friends from college, Travis Higginbotham, he works here as well. So pretty much a family endeavor.
Yeah, that sounds like a great group to be a part of. That's awesome that your family can be there together. And what are the goals of the Hemp Mine? What are you trying to provide, or what makes your company different?
Well, as you guys are beginning, or I guess have the past couple of years worked in the cannabis industry, promoting the water activity meter, you find that it's not always a lot of trustworthy people in the business, or maybe not for the right reasons. And so it makes it very difficult to know who to trust in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so something we try to do is be very transparent in everything we do, whether it's what's in a tincture bottle or whether it's, what's the background of this genetic that we're growing and breeding, and, what's the data we collected from last year that we can provide you the data this year where you can grow successfully, and make money and, feel confident doing the next year. So transparency is something we really strive for, no matter what we're doing. But, I would say long-term goal, the biggest part of the Hemp Mine is our plant production unit. We grow vegetative liners and sell those across the U.S., distributed out of 6 different greenhouse partners, while the breeding is actually taken here in South Carolina. So I would say plant genetics is where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like transparency is really important, as well as being a science-driven company. Some of the experiments that you've recently done on post-harvesting caught my attention, and I was wondering if you could talk about those experiments and what your goals were there.
Post-harvest is very exciting for me. One reason why this plant was so exciting for me is because there's so little research done, and that's fault to regulation, and it just being something that was done successfully in the black market, but at the same time things were done from simple trial and error, not necessarily based off of science. And even more so, universities weren't there to pitch in and help figure things out. So, even though the plant science itself is lacking, even more so the post-harvest physiology is extremely lacking. And so when I was at Outco, we did what I called to be the burp experiment. Mm-hmm. And so that, to just explain what the burp is, you grow your cannabis flower, you dry it, and you dry it for, many reasons why you dry other foods, where it preserves, it doesn't spoil. And then you cure it. And so, when you say cure, you might think of wine, or another type of food. But, the problem is you can't compare it 1-to-1 exactly as you would, or even tobacco. There's some very different processes that are going on. And the thing is, we don't even know what's happening, much less know how to manipulate it. And so the burp for me, the burp project was just to try to wrap some data points around what's even going on. And, the cure traditionally is taking that dried hemp flower right after it's dried, put it in a bucket. And I would say 99% of the people in the cannabis industry, it's just basically a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot. And you put it in there, and, at this point it's an art. So it could be for 3 days for this grower. It could be 14 days. It could be 30 days. It's, whatever your experience is showing to be the best results, or whoever taught you. And then it comes out, and there's theory all over it. It's removing of nutrients, which makes no sense. It's the exchanging of gases. Okay, well, which gases and which ones can we add to make that process better? We don't know yet. So anyways, I did a fast and dirty version 1, where we put it in buckets. We measure CO2, we measure oxygen, humidity, et cetera, et cetera. And we're also taking water activity before and throughout. And so, what we really could take away is that there's a lot of CO2 being put out by the plants. Why? Don't know yet, but we at least know that fact. The oxygen meter, just to be honest with you, it was not reading correctly. So that's going to be something we repeat, obviously. As well as ethylene was something we measured. But again, the ethylene that was put out by the curing process was so much that it was over the capacity of our testing unit. So when we repeat, we're going to have a different unit to be used to be able to test ethylene, because ethylene for me specifically is something that's very interesting. I, back in grad school, when I dealt with post-harvest, it was taking cuttings. So, you have a poinsettia plant, you take a small portion of the tip, and then you either stick it, or, something we were looking at a lot is what's happening during shipping, because in poinsettias, most of the stock plants are grown in South America and they're shipped up to the US. And if there's too much ethylene, they'll rot. But if you think about bananas, you want to give bananas at a certain time ethylene where they will ripen, where they're nice and enjoyable.
Right.
So if this flower is putting off a lot of ethylene, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do we want to inhibit that, or do we want to encourage that? We don't know. So at least wrapping our heads around what's being produced naturally is step 1. And then from there, we can, do different things to inhibit or add to. So that's something, again, we will be looking at in greater detail. But I think the one really big takeaway from that project was that curing is a homogenization process. So our water activity, when we took it beforehand, keep in mind it was about a week of drying. And so obviously the outside of the bud is going to dry out faster, and the middle will be wetter. And, over time that'll work itself out. But what we found is that the water activity was lower when we pulled it out of the drying room, put it in the bucket, and then at the end we tested again, and it showed that the water activity was higher. And so these are sealed buckets, and so we're not, the theory is not that somehow water or moisture got into the bucket and made everything a higher water activity. It's more of that all the buds are homogenizing, and so the water is evenly distributing through the buds. And so, a lot of people guessed that, but I think that was probably the first time that anybody put a number on it. So that was really cool to find, but obviously so much more to learn about what's happening in that bucket. We're just touching the surface here.
Yeah, this process really reminds me of winemaking and same thing, that curing process. You know, a lot of people do it in a very artistic way or a traditional way, but it sounds like you are trying to put science first and trying to put some numbers around what's actually happening during this burp experiment. What are your water activity values? Are you trying to target a certain water activity, or why is water activity important for understanding this process?
It's very important. So obviously for safety purposes, we have to dry it down to a certain percent or the microbes which are there, basically. But it's also important because again, the cannabis industry has kind of been working from the ground up. And when I first got to Alco, the guys were trying to explain to me, well, when is my question was, when is the flower dry enough to then go into the curing process? And
Mhm.
they grabbed a stem and they bent it, and at the time it didn't make a noise, it just bent. And they said, well, this still needs to dry some. Once it's dry, it'll snap. And so for me, that was a little bit bothersome.
So this is
uh,
the SNAP test
this is
that we've heard about.
Yes, this is the snap test, that you'll actually hear a crack when you bend the stem.
Hmm.
And so, for myself and the PhD chemist that was on staff, that was a little bit mind-boggling, and we knew there had to be a better way. And
Hmm.
so did a little reading, and of course found that water activity is that metric, even greater than the moisture content meters that some people would use. We found that to be the standard, and immediately went down that road. And after we were able to put some metrics around, well, what should it be at certain points during the drying process, we ended up being very happy with that move.
Did you investigate different curing conditions? So are you using different environmental conditions, or what does that part of your experiment look like?
Well, we had to start somewhere. And if you ask just about anybody in the cannabis industry, the goal is to have it about 60% relative humidity and about 60 degrees Fahrenheit temperature.
Hmm.
So we started there, and at that metric, we ended up having dry flower at about 7 days. And so, you hear everybody saying, oh, well, if you go 30 days, 14 days, you'll have a much better um, uh, product. And so I got to reading through the journals out there, and um, botrytis is one of the biggest problems during drying because,
Hmm.
if not dry enough, mold can grow. But at the same time, we didn't want to dry too quickly because that would volatilize the terpenes. And so the plant would lose, the good smells that you want to keep. So, in reading, we found that botrytis will not continue to grow under about 0.8. And so our thought there was, well, let's very quickly get it down to that 0.8 where the botrytis will cease and continuing to grow. And then let's try to stretch out that time period. Instead of 4 or 5 days, let's stretch it out to about 2 weeks, staying stable right under the 0.8 mark, above the 0.7 mark, which was, it took quite a few times to figure out how to get the room to allow the plant to stay within those parameters,
Hmm.
which actually ended up being, a lot of dehumidification at first, and then actually kind of riding with the help of foggers. And so that's how we kept the water activity stable. Again, looking through journals, we saw that a lot of the enzymatic activity continues to work within a plant between that 0.6 and zero point 0.7 and 0.8. So whatever it is that is happening with the plant at that point, in which, I like to kind of think of it, if you're keeping it wet enough, it's almost a zombie plant,
Hmm.
not necessarily a flower, but a plant. If it's not all the way dried, it has the potential to come back to life and maybe be rooted. So it's kind of that halfway in between where there are enzymatic activities happening. So the goal there was to keep it, for about 10 days, but at that higher water activity level, and then dry it off at the end very quickly to be basically what a consumer would prefer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of the setup we had going for drying.
And as you get ready for a second round of experiments, have you already started some new experiments? And what are the goals of this next round? And what are you changing or what are you adding to those experiments?
Well, the most, I guess, this next round of experiments, we're not going to do too much with the actual drying step. I want to kind of keep that, just one step for drying, probably do the 60-60 just to be standard. And then what we'll really look at is what's happening in curing.
Mm-hmm.
And so before, measuring before and afters there. I guess one other big thing we did find in the first burp experiment was that those 5-gallon buckets that, even the ones with the gaskets, they're not airtight. We had CO2 sensors in the rooms, so ambient, and then CO2 sensors in the buckets. And what we found is that daily you would see a spike of CO2, basically spiking at lunchtime. And so, we were able to correlate that exactly with the ambient CO2 sensor. So they were in the rooms with the trimming team. And so all that CO2 is actually coming from the trimming team, and it was getting inside the bucket at the same rate. So what we're going to do in this next experiment is use that bucket just because it is the standard bucket. We need to understand what's happening there, but then we'll also use, I hadn't decided yet, either glass or stainless steel, truly sealed container where there's no effect from the ambient gases of what's in the room that it's in.
And if someone listening wants to learn more about your research, is it published somewhere? Is it available for listeners to read? Where can they find out more about this experiment?
So the first burp experiment, there's a PowerPoint on, I think it's called SlideShare. Yeah, it's correlated with LinkedIn, the SlideShare. This next experiment I'm actually doing with Clemson University. Mm-hmm. And so I'll try to give some sneak peeks on my Instagram, but we'll actually publish that one. So it might take a little while to get that wrote up.
Yeah, definitely takes a while, but we'll make sure to watch for it. One thing that I wanted to touch on, and I probably should have asked this earlier, but, a lot of people, when they hear about cannabis and hemp, they kind of get confused by what it all means. Could you maybe take a step back and just describe some similarities and key differences to our listeners between cannabis and hemp?
Yeah, that's definitely a confusing one if you're new to cannabis in general. And so let's start with that. They're both hemp and marijuana. They both are cannabis sativa. It is the same plant. It's just a plant that has diverted to be a high THC plant, so a plant that will, in fact, get you high, to a plant that produces a different metabolite, a different cannabinoid, CBD or CBG, which does not get you high, which we would say is hemp. They look almost exactly the same, but some, again, were either bred for a certain purpose or originated from a certain area where just in the wild, it either by nature was high CBD, high THC. But, for us, the biggest thing is law, is regulation. And so for this plant, cannabis sativa, law defines it as this plant if containing under 0.3% THC. So if it contains 0.4%, it's technically marijuana. If it's 0.3% or under, it's hemp. And that could be hemp that's grown for CBD. That could be hemp that's grown for fiber production.
And is that percentage, that 0.3%, is that a national standard? Is that state by state? And are there people pushing to change that percentage?
Yeah, that's a federal standard. Um, and absolutely, I think if they moved it to 1%, everyone would be very, very happy. It's quite impressive to see how different, in terms of yield specifically for CBD, how different a plant behaves at that point 0.3 regulation versus even point 0.8. You have very, very different plants, just how the genetics work from that difference. So, if we could go to 1%, nobody's getting high on 1%. And, it would just provide a lot more opportunity for the farmer, for the breeder, for the
Mhm.
industry as a total.
And my last question today for you is, you've transitioned from graduate student, you were a VP of cultivation, now a co-founder and founder. What advice do you have for students or young professionals about growing their careers and taking it to the next level?
I would say put yourself out there. Um, you know, take as many internships as you possibly can. Be willing to move. If just for example, if you're a Clemson student and you want to get in this industry, get out there to California, to Colorado, where they've been doing this a long time, and network, and get your hands dirty doing trimming, doing all those things that will really pump you up to have a nice resume for when you are done with your studies. You're not just a 4.0 student, but you also have these experiences, and now you have, the VP at that company to give you recommendations. That says a lot. The other thing that's kind of cool now versus even when I was in grad school is that Instagram is a huge networking tool. A lot of people are, I don't know why it worked out like this, but Instagram is a huge tool for cannabis and marijuana companies, as well as, growers of those companies having their own Instagram, and they're willing to talk to you, and they're willing to share some things they're doing. So it's very easy to just, look through your phone and try to network that way, and keep up to date with what is going on in the industry. So, biggest thing, just put yourself out there and get experience, and, try your hardest when you do get those opportunities.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Justice. We really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting this episode out there. We'll include your Instagram, if that's okay with you, when we post this, so that anyone listening, if they want to learn more about your experiments or just connect, that they can do that. So thanks again, Dr. Justice.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Zachary Cartwright. This is Water and Food. Find this podcast on Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.